Hello and welcome to the workshop. In this video I'd like to talk about my two workbenches or MFTs, multifunction tables, how I made them. I'll also show you my slab flattening sled and how that works with the bench. I'll show you my track saw setup and the router table with a really great router lift option that's on a budget. So I'll also show you some of the accessories that I use with these benches. So let's talk about the benches themselves first. They are 1 meter by 2 meters. I've put them on braked wheels, which I added, so they can be in this configuration 4 meters by 1 meter, or if I move them side by side, they are 2 meters square. They are adjustable in height from flat up to this height and a bit more at 200 millimeter increments, about 8 inches at a time. I don't move them very often, but I have worked on things like, well, I was making some vanity units and then I had them a bit lower because otherwise the top of the vanity units would have been up here. So they're very flexible. The tops are 1-inch plywood. They're good quality plywood as well. And obviously I needed to drill a lot of holes at very accurate centres in order for the MFT part of the design to work properly. And I didn't want to use the path system. I have nothing against that, but I just think it's overpriced, to be honest. And from what I can see on YouTube with people using it, it seems to be quite a slow way of making these holes, especially when you need to make a lot. So what I did was I bought this, which is made from 3mm aluminium and comes with 3 guides here. What I did was I carefully measured and found the center of the table lengthways, and then I worked out the best place for the holes, and I made this first hole on my own without anything, just with the plunge router in the position that I needed it. And then what you do is you then place one of these like so, line it up so it's nice and square, do the far one over there, and once again put the plug in like so, and then you can just plunge all of these holes at one time. No messing around with moving a guide around, you just do a lot. And once this row is finished, you take these 2 plugs out, move over 4 rows, 2 more plugs, drill, plunge 3 more, and so on. Now what you do need, and I'll bring the camera closer, I'll show you the setup on the router. So here on the router you need a 30mm copying ring and a 20mm router bit, and you'll also need 2 pieces of scrap 6mm ply. And in order to, say, drill this one, you put 2 pieces of ply on either side. That keeps the base off just enough to locate the copying ring, and then you just plunge. Simple as that. Move on to the next one by lifting up, moving along, dropping in, ready to plunge. It could not be simpler. That's all there is to it. Now, price wise, this cost around €110, including the 3 locating pins. The copying ring I already had. I did buy a 20mm bit. Now if you're in the States and watching this, I'm sure you can get a similar setup, but I believe that these are 19mm in the States, so you need a slightly different size ring depending on the template that you get. But I highly recommend this method. You could imagine how fast it is. And then all I did was come in and use the palm router with a 45-degree bit on it, just to give me a little chamfer on the tops. Okay, so that's how I did that. Let's show you some other parts of the desks. So let's imagine that I want to cut this piece of MDF to 1 metre long. All I've done is I've measured out and put a mark at 1 metre, and then I can use these, what I would call the absolute original type of bench dog. These come from Black & Decker Workmate, and people are often throwing these away at the dump along with the broken Workmate, and I collect these, but they work perfectly in this case. I can put, say, 3 here, and when I push the board up, they swivel somewhat and go dead straight. And this board is now exactly at 90 degrees to these holes. Now you can, if you wish, use what have become the more sort of fashionable aluminium bench dogs. They're working exactly the same way. And then what I did in order to save, once again, you can tell I'm on a budget all the time. I've just got some 20mm lengths of wooden dowel, and I'll put one here and one in the opposite hole. And then I get my track saw, and I have these little clips. Now I think I bought these on eBay or Amazon. They are for the track saw. And in fact, you could just push the track up to the bench dogs, and this track is now exactly at 90 degrees to this board, because the board is pushed up against the dogs and the track is against these 2 dowels. Now if you wish, you can just clip them on like so, and that is now held ready for the track saw to go on. All I have to do is push this mark up exactly to the track, and now when I cut, I will have a piece of exactly 1 metre long and exactly square. Bear in mind that the thickness or the kerf of the saw blade will come this side of the line, so this is the piece that is the right length. That's the only thing to bear in mind, is the removal of material by the saw blade. Make sure you've got that on the right side. But that's the simple setup with the track saw. That's very repeatable, easy to do. I must admit that it can pay to lift the piece you're cutting slightly off the table so that you don't cut into the table. But that's the track saw setup. So next up, let's talk about the flattening sled. This is quite a simple build, basically made out of 12mm MDF. I glued 2 pieces together to get 24mm here, so that's around 1 inch, because I was concerned with bowing. The workshop can get quite damp, and MDF doesn't like damp and has a tendency to bow somewhat. So when I bought this house, it was a ruin, and in one of the barns there was an old brass bed which was held together with some, I don't know, 1/8 of an inch, 3 or 4mm angle iron. So I cut some of that up so that this would do the supporting and I wouldn't be suffering from any bow across this metre odd length. This isn't actually the router that I use. I use the big router, which is a Triton. I think it's 3 horsepower, but that's attached to the router table at the moment. But you can see roughly what's going on here. I use this big 2-inch 50mm flattening bit, so it sticks down quite a way, and I'm cutting quite big pieces. You'll need a 1/2 inch collet if your router doesn't already have one, if you're using a bit this long or this big. They're generally 1/2 inch diameter there. And obviously I've just put some beeswax to aid with the sliding. You go across, move along 2 inches back, and so on. I fitted 4 of these wheels to begin with, just those 4, but it did have a bit of a tendency to wander, and I didn't want it falling off the back of the table when I've got a high-speed router spinning. So then I made these standoffs with once again 4 more wheels, 2 either side, just to stop it moving. So now I can move and there's no danger of it falling off the table whatsoever. So it's a pretty simple setup. I put the slab on, depending on how long or whatever, level it up as best I can, maybe with some hot glue or some shims. And once it's in position, I can then lower the router and find the high spot and then go from there. So, you know, removing 2, 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch maximum per pass. I wouldn't suggest anything more, but this setup works really well. And all I've done is I've added a French cleat here, and I'll show you where I store it, so it's hanging on the wall out of the way at all times when I'm not using it itself. I can hook up the dust extraction. As I say, it's not actually this one, but the Triton of course also has dust extraction, so I can run along quite quickly. I have attached a stick to the router to get it right the way across, but I'm trying not to get in the way of the camera, but you know, I can go all the way across here, although I'm generally not doing slabs this wide. They're generally just a couple of feet wide, 600 mil or so. So it's quite simple to go along, as I say, move along, back, move, and then change the height of the router and do the same thing until the slab is flat. So that's my setup there. Can do about 900 millimeter wide slabs, and I can go up to almost 4 meters in length. So that's that one. Let's move on to the router table. So before I show you the actual router table, I just thought I'd show you the router station where I keep most of the bits and pieces that I need when I'm working on the router. I have the fence here, the main fence for the router table. For the palm sander, I keep these bits, the guides. These are the various rings for my router plate, and down here are various other bits and pieces that I need. The spanner that I use, different collet sizes, the adjuster, the spring, because the spring isn't kept on the router when it's in the router table configuration. That's only for plunging when it's off the table. And here I've got a decent selection of router bits, and here I have another plate that works with the router when it's not in the table. So I just thought I'd show you that briefly. This is on a French cleat, so is this, and so is this. So it's all easily moved around if I were to move the table. So here's the router table itself in its somewhat naked configuration. I've got a plate here. Now I did a bit of research with these plates. They come in all sorts of prices, from stupidly cheap to quite expensive. And the more I read about the cheap ones, the more I found out that they aren't necessarily very flat. And I thought that was quite important. And as I was saving money on a router lift, I decided to go the whole hog and got an Incra one, which is obviously top quality. This is a magnetic plate. They just pop out depending which size router bit you've got. I matched up. This is also Incra T-Track, which I'll show you in use in a minute. And I also bought a power supply so that I have easy on and particularly off easily to the router itself. I didn't want to be bending underneath the bench turning the router on and off, because if something goes horribly wrong, I want to be able to use my knee and kick it like that to turn it off if necessary, or just by hand like so. So let's set it up so you can see how I use it. So here you can see the router table set up. This fence is just held on with a couple of these T-Track clamps that slide in to obviously the T-Track. This configuration can work this way or across here. If I'm working with longer material, I can get over 3.5 meters through here if need be. If I was shaping, say, a skirting board baseboards, I think that is in the States, have these two feather boards in position that are easily adjustable up or down. Now, I actually got this in a garage sale. It was on a small, came as a small router table, but I didn't need the other pieces. I just kept this when I built this. The reason that I'm such a massive fan of the Triton, I think it's a T0001 or something, it's the biggest one they do, 3.5 horsepower, is you don't need a router lift. It comes with this handle. It just goes into the plate, and now I can wind up and down with great accuracy. You know, router lifts are quite expensive, especially if you get something of quality, and this is just built in. I mean, why wouldn't you use that? It's fantastic. And when you bring it all the way up, the collet locks into position, so you just take off the faceplate, which is just held on with rare earth magnets. You bring it all the way up, and when it's at the top of its reach, the collet locks, so you can undo, change route a bit, do it up, drop it back down to the required height. If need be, you can change out this particular router plate from Incra. Came with 3 different diameter faces, throat plates. This particular one is adjustable with some Allen keys just to get it all flat and square, but this is my basic setup. Works fantastically well. I'm utilising the dust extraction which is built into this fence. Now, I do realise I'm quite lucky that I got this cheap router table that I just kept the fence for. You could make something similar out of plywood or something. I don't think that would be particularly difficult. I've made a similar, or not dissimilar, fence for my table saw out of solid black MDF, so that would be possible. But that's the setup on the table. So that shows you the main components of the bench. I'll show you a couple of things that I've done that help with the day-to-day working on the bench, and a couple of setups that I use, different clamps and so on. So here at the end of the bench I have a paper roll. If I'm doing a glue layup of some sort, I want to keep glue or resins off of the bench, I can just roll out the paper, cut it, and I'm good to go. I've also got a selection of various standoffs. If I'm painting something, I might be using these. I've got a cam clamp that I 3D printed. Lots more bench dogs from workmates from the dump. I also made these painting standoffs. These are just bits of 2x2, just pine with a 20mm piece of dowel in, and I can put 4 of those on like so. Put a board down, I can sand or paint or whatever. This material on top is just anti-slip tablecloth, just cut to size and glued on. As you can see, I've got a bit careless there with a drill, and here with, I don't know what happened there, maybe a chisel or something. Doesn't really matter. When they're homemade, I could either make some more or whatever. These I just 3D printed. The idea with these is that you actually fill them with concrete, so they've got some sort of mass to them. And once again, you could put some anti-slip on, wouldn't hurt. So you get an idea there. If you're wondering what this is the makings of a lowrider CNC. It's 3D printed. These parts go up and down, these 2 bars, and obviously this goes this way. I just haven't got round to finishing it. I have got all the components, but since I bought my laser, I'm more focused on the laser work because that's quieter. whereas this would be making quite a lot of noise. But I would like to finish this off at some stage, so A, it gives me the opportunity to use CNC, because not everything fits in the laser. I could do quite large CNC work on these benches. I just haven't got round to it at the moment. But that gives you a rough idea. Let's head back to standing in front of the bench, and I'll just wrap things up. Oh, there's one other thing I want to show you as well. Here's another little something that I made. It's just a vise attached to almost a mini MFT. I don't have the need, or particularly the room, to have a vise permanently mounted in the workshop. I only use it now and again. So I created this that sits on French cleat, so it's normally hanging on my wall. But if I need to use it, it can go in like so, so that's already pretty well done. And these two just, now it's pretty solid. I can cut, job done. Another thing that I do sometimes is, if I'm re-gripping golf clubs, I might put it this way round. And then I can re-grip golf clubs this way. That's just one of the, they're only for me. It's not a job that I do. It's just sometimes my clubs need re-gripping. So it goes through 90 degrees, and that wouldn't be possible with this type of vise on this particular bench. The other thing that I did was I made some power. It's just that there's T-track all the way around this particular bench. Both the benches aren't identical, as you've no doubt noticed. They're slightly different. That's just how they came. I was lucky to get them at all. So I just made a piece of plywood that slides in the T-track, and this just clips on. That gives me power. If I'm using the router table, I'll take it up that end, and so I've got power there for both the router itself and the dust extraction for the router. So that pretty much sums things up. If you found this video useful, please like and subscribe. Really helps the channel. If you have any questions, ideas, etc., please drop a line in the comments and I'll answer each and every one of you. Okay, I've been Alan, you've been watching, and I'll see you in the next video.